Father's Day is a great day, and truly I was blessed this morning with a lovely present. Nice big stick of biltong. Now let me say this, on any day that is a good day, sitting with a nice piece of biltong. So I'm very excited, and if you thought of giving me a piece of biltong, please, if you ask if when is enough, it's never enough. So it's really good to be together this morning. Lovely fathers, great dads I can just see here in this room. And it's such an honor to have our family and friends online that are with us today. We know that we would rather have been together, but God, in His wisdom, we will always seek the good of others. Father's Day, as you know, is a very special day, as is Mother's Day, and is also the Lord's Day. And as we visit together this morning around His Word, I want us to, just before we really get into the lesson, just watch a clip that I'd like you to watch with us, and as by way of introduction.
Too emotional for this.
I know.
We'll come back. We'll come back. Oh, my goodness. Oh,
What do you love about your dad?
So my dad is my superhero. He gives me strength and hope.
I love that you've never given up on me. No matter how much I was a difficult child, you just never gave up when a lot of people did.
What I love about my dad is the fact how selfless he is. He always puts everybody else first.
I love that Daddy's really nice.
You know exactly how to put a smile on my face when I'm in the worst of moods. You stay up late nights and so I can talk to you, and you're there with open arms, and I can just talk to you about anything.
Dad, there are tons of things I love about you. And you know a lot of them, but I think probably the thing that I have loved most about you is how intentional you are about spending time together.
You're a hardworking man, and just your passion for all of us as a family is just great.
Thanks, bud.
AJ, I want you to ask your dad that question for me.
Oh gosh, Dad. Here you go.
What about me makes you proud?
What about me makes you proud?
Oh boy, what about me makes me proud? Well, for you, what makes me proud is that we can actually work together, and that we actually get along.
Dad, what about me makes you proud?
Tons of stuff. Your wit, your beauty, inner and outer beauty, your love for the Lord, love for people. Yeah, you're just an amazing young lady.
What about me makes you proud?
The way that you like to learn how to ride horses, that makes me proud of you.
How you found your way, your relationship with God, and that's what makes us proud.
I just love being a dad because I love going and watching you play sports and spending time with you and hanging out with you and raising up to be a Montreal Canadiens fan.
तो मैं आपको क्या चीज़ बोलता हूँ, आपको फख्र फील करता हूँ.
सबसे जो बड़ी चीज़ है वो ये है कि आप खुदा से प्यार करते हो, जो मुझे आप पर फख्र है, और अपने माँ बाप की हर चीज़ को आप उनका ख्याल रखते हो कि मेरे माँ बाप की क्या नीड्स हैं, इसलिए मुझे आप पर ये फख्र है.
What about me makes you proud?
Everything that you are, like everything.
What about me makes you proud?
You always have a strength, an inner strength in you that is addictive. And I just love the fact that even in the moments where I feel weak, Sarah, that you actually make me feel strong, and you've made me a better person.
Are you trying to make me cry? You're doing a good job. No, I love you.
Love you.
Father's Day presents a unique opportunity for us to honor fathers. When we honor a father, we honor the God that has created him to be a dad and to be a father and to care for his children. Fatherhood has been so distorted through media and the sickening thinking that's going around that we're living in a society where even gender roles are being confused. My son, I'm talking about William, came home the other day and he said, "You won't believe it. There were kids at my school, men wearing dresses." Now, please, I'm not being stereotypical, and I am no fool because I understand the philosophies of humankind. But the only thing in psychology that will tell you that you're walking a very dangerous line is that you are walking in the line of messing up one important aspect, and that's the aspect of identity. Identity is one of those things that are part of the developmental curve within each individual. Your brain is being messed with, you are played, and you're playing into that narrative. You're a fool to believe that all genders are the same biologically, psychologically, and functionally. We're living in a society that we came out of where masculinity was compared to a John Wayne mentality. Cowboys don't cry, and I love Glenn's comment, especially in front of their horses. And I suppose in the modern metaphor, in front of their motorbikes and in front of their cars. Then we saw the emergence of Rambo, the kind that goes and destroys things and really comes back very angry from his wars. And then we see the other one of Archie Bunker, a bumbling idiot that sits in his couch and he thinks that the world resolves around his navel. And then we watch more and more on our media today that we have in Netflix specifically, and I think we need to watch this kind of thing, is that they have a category called very strong female role. You see, these kind of things are deliberately designed to alter the way that we think. It is also designed to alter society. It is also designed to have our children conditioned into a different way of thinking rather than a biblical way of thinking. Brethren, let me say this to you. You see, us as fathers have got the unique task to engage our children in an environment in which they need to function and blossom. But the substrate of that is their spirituality and their relationship with God. When we look at Paul in 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, he writes to the church there and he says, "We were gentle among you like nursing mother, taking care of our own children, being affectionately desirous to you. We were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our own selves, because you have become dear to us. You remember, brothers, our labor and our toil. We work day and night and day, that we may not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. For you know how, like a father with his children, we exhorted each of you and discouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory." Our society is bent, deliberately bent, to alter and change males into bumbling idiots. I cannot begin to tell you how many people I engage that are confused and men that are not sure of what their role is in society. And you might find that hugely amusing when you run a man down and your husband down in front of your children, humiliate him, and try to create this kind of facade of having strong women. Now, I'm the last person to not create. I've got a very strong daughter, very strong personality. But if I watch a relationship with a husband, it is gentle and it's kind. I've got a strong wife, and I love her to bare bits. But I can tell you now that she is extremely clear of how and where God's will fits into our lives. And most important, what governs that. It is not about power. It's about seeking His glory. It's not about prominence or oppression or suppression or even coercion. It is about humility and being completely submissive to God. I'm going to deal with just 4 aspects of what it is to be a godly father. In the first place, being a godly father is one who loves his children. If we talk about this lesson today, it's a portrait of a godly father. Paul speaks very powerfully in verse 8. And he says, we affectionately were desirous of you because you had become dear to us. The word is translated affectionately desirous. And there's a whole lot of Greek words that are clumped into one. And the Greek writers are renowned for that, to compound their verbs and their adjectives. And what he's basically saying, many other translations will tell you, we loved you so much. We cared for you so much. We felt strongly about you. And it's a term that is often used of a father holding his child. I'm not quite sure with any of the fathers here remembering the first time you held your first child. When you held him in your hand, you were not quite sure how to hold the baby. And then your wife would help you and say, hold him or her, but hold him like this, with her head firmly in your hand. You must support the neck so as that she can fit gently. We were allowed in with gowns and gloves, and then we could sit with them so that we could not infect them with any of the bugs that we were carrying in. And you see, brethren, these things are wonderful. I remember both of my children being born. And you see, brethren, but it's also rare to see a father that's a cuddling father. But Paul brings it out and he says, be the cuddling father. Be the caring one that loves and cares for his child. Holds the baby, even though it is awkward, but learn how to do it properly. And so too, we can be good fathers, not good fathers, but excellent fathers. That we can show emotion to our boys and to our children and our girls. You see, brethren, when we raise our children, the first thing they must learn in their home is love. Many years ago, there was a cartoon strip called For Better or For Worse. And you know those cartoon strips that we used to read was where the father comes into the lounge and he finds his daughter watching television and she's eating popcorn. So he decides to sit right next to her. And as he's sitting there, a little thought balloon comes over his head where he's thinking, I remember when she was so young, I held her in my arms and loved her, and it was wonderful. Now look at her, she's all grown up. I wonder what she would think if I held her like I used to hold her when she was young, and I used to tell her that I loved her. And then he concludes that she might be uncomfortable with that, and so he rather doesn't do that. While on the other side is his daughter, and a thought balloon comes up where she says, I wonder why Dad doesn't hug me anymore. You see, brethren, we must not be afraid to hug our children. And if anything, it's going to come from us. We as the parent knows how important it is to be loved. Modern psychology will also tell you that the biggest factor that determines a child's view of human sexuality comes from the father. The father determines how that child will view human sexuality, or not only sexuality, but also sexual intimacy. And you and I must teach our children the cornerstone and the marks of non-sexual affection, safely loving them in a way, hugging them appropriately, and so gauge within their hearts the idea of this is how love is. This is what love is. The point of that first point is to say, fathers, do not be hesitant to be demonstratively affectionate with your children. Show them affection. The Father's love is so powerful that Jesus would use it in Luke chapter 15 when he speaks of the prodigal son. And we know that wonderful narrative that as a teenager they tend to know how things in the country needs to be run, and it's probably the best to then appoint them as president. But the picture is in that story as it unfolds, he says to himself, you know what, it's a good time for me to leave the joint. My people are old fuddy-duddies. I'm going to do my own thing. Dad, hey, how's about that inheritance? Give it to me. I'm going to go with my mates and I'm going to have a jolly time. Well, we know the story. He goes off to a far land and he squanders all his money. And he runs out of money, he runs out of friends, and he ends in a pig pen. What a terrible thing for a little Jewish boy to sit next to a pig pen feeding pigs. But then Jesus said these words, which is so important. He came to himself and started thinking, how many of my father's servants have plenty of food? And here I am starving to death. He says, I will get up and go to my father. But I want you to note something very, very important. The fact that he would yearn to go to his father tells you that there was a relationship between him and his dad that was so powerful that in the absence of affection in the world, after he'd been commodified, used and abused, and then just discarded, he could then say, I'm going back to my dad. I want that. And here we find that what is so powerful is that the draw card of the Father is more important than anything else. Research had been done in prisons. And let me say that when it comes to Mother's Day, 99% of all prisoners write cards to their dads. Their mothers. When it comes to Father's Day, 5% writes to their fathers. You see, I don't care how you cut that cake, but absentee fathers has an effect on the psyche, confidence, and identity of each child. And even if you look at people in prisons, every single time I have spoken to a prisoner, bar one, I've spoken to people that tell me that my father never loved me. Uncle Bob and I sat in prisons one day in Maximum in Voorberg prison. And you know what this guy said? He said, you are the only men that ever came to visit me in 8 years in prison. Think about it. Carry on running men down. Carry on and you will see the bitter fruit of the product that you raise. You see, the son says, I'm going to dad. He says, he rehearses and he says, when I go back to dad, I'm going to tell him, I've sinned against you and I've sinned against heaven. And he says, I'm also going to consider my standing within the household. And he says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like your hired servants. It was a speech that was running through his mind. He was saying, I feel so unworthy of what I've done to you, Dad, that, you know what? I'd rather be a servant in your household than want to be called your son again. But we know the story. The first thing the dad does, he loves him, throws his hands around him and hugs him and kissed him. And his father was not afraid to express his love. His longing eclipsed his annoyance for what, and the mess and the spandaberigheid of his son. He went in there and he says, love will draw my child close to me. In the second place, godly fathers means that you're a hard worker. It means that you've got an excellent work ethic, that you never ever play around, play games, but you work hard for your family. Paul speaks in verse 8, we are ready to share with you not only the gospel, but also our own selves. You see, brethren, let me say this to you. If you want to raise lazy children, you be unproductive and live a lazy lifestyle. Watch your children do exactly the same. Paul says when we worked in Thessalonica, we didn't just stand up and preach. That was easy. We did far more than that. We poured our hearts and our lives into you and taking care of our own needs and yours. Ephesians 5:25, he says there's an abomination to men. And he says, you know, specifically, sometimes when we look at at fathers, the role of fatherhood is so entrenched within God's word that he even intertwines it with Christ's love for the church. In Ephesians 5:25, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Somewhere along the line, we often find that men in our society thinks that sometimes they need to be served. Jesus came and he says, I did not come to be served, but I've come to serve. And if we're going to be like Christ, we must live for our families. To be the head of the house does not mean that you are the power that are unopposed. What it means is your wife respects you and loves you, cares for you. Why? Because you care for them and you honor them and your children. 1 Thessalonians 2:9, for you remember, brothers, our labor and toil. We work night and day that we might not be a burden to any of you, while we proclaim to you the gospel of God. Paul says we are willing to make sacrifices, to make things easier on you. We make things easier on you because we love you and we care for you. We don't want to overburden you. You know, one of the things, brethren, I want to say to us fathers, let's be careful to just think that we can give our children things in this world and that it will replace our physical presence with them. If you listen to this one child, she says, Dad, what I admire most about you is that you are intentional in the way that you spend time with us. James Dobson made a comment. He says, we are so concerned about giving children what we didn't have when we grew up that we neglect to give them what we did have. Maybe we didn't have material things, but we did have appreciation of the value of things and the willingness to work for it. In the third place, being a godly father is living out your faith. In verse 10, you are witnesses in God also how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. And Paul is saying here, when we were with you, we lived holy lives. We were righteous people. We lived in our faith. We were blameless. You can't point a finger at their lives. You couldn't say that here's where they failed or there's where they failed. You see, brethren, we often don't think about what other people think and what our children are watching. There's a comment by Stu Weber in his book called Tender Warrior. And he comments on the fact that men who provide for their families, and he says the following, the physical necessities of life are the simplest, easiest duties of the provisionary. A little food, a little shelter, and physical provision is a done deal. But that isn't real provision. As men, we do so often misplace our vision. We focus on houses and cars and stock portfolios and bank accounts and piling up stuff. And we say, if I have a financial plan and I've tucked away some money for college, if I had a good life insurance policy, I'm being a good provider. We revert to the things that we can see, when in fact it is the unseen world, the world of the spirit, the world of relationships, when we ought to be majoring in our provision. Matters of character, heart, spirit, integrity, justice, humility. The kinds of things that last and that can stand and hold up any child in the adversarial environment that we stand, and equip them uniquely to be able to function optimally. The character traits that outlive a man. So often, brethren, we are so worried what we're leaving our children for as an inheritance. But God is more important what legacy you're leaving behind with your life. What will your children remember you by? Remember what the children said, Dad, this is what you are. This is what you are to me. Brethren, we are the spiritual leaders of our homes and our households. And it is not something that is so misconstrued in an ignorant society that does nothing about God, that somehow thinks that it's to do with power. It's got to do with accountability and responsibility that is placed at the door of us as fathers. That we look at our home and we guide our family. We pray with our wives. We pray for our wives and for each of our children. Our children must hear the story of the gospel from your lips. My son went with me since the age of 5 and fell asleep inside of my jacket when I was teaching people the gospel. He watched me teach people the gospel. At the age of 7, he wasn't even 8 years old. He said, Dad, please baptize me into Christ. I was astounded to listen to him while he was telling me the story of the gospel. And I baptized him into Christ because all of us just said this kid knows everything that he needs to know. And I said to him, why are you making this decision? He says, Dad, because I know God. I still remember that Saturday. Still remember it. There's value, brethren, by walking a righteous walk. You see, brethren, if you walk with God daily, the children will watch how it's done. Irma Bombeck, in a humorous way, spoke about fathers. She says, when I was a kid, a father was like a light in the refrigerator. Everybody's house had one, but nobody really knew what it did when the door was shut. And that's often the case. All of us have lives, but sometimes we just don't know what happens in darkness. But live in such a way that your kids will know what happens in the light and in the darkness. You see, brethren, kids need to know when the doors are shut how you and mom resolve conflict, how you talk with each other about finance, how you navigate through difficult times. And often we want to shield our children from that, rather than saying to them, guys, we need to cut back on these things because at the moment it is very, very expensive. We cannot afford it. And the children understand that. It's absolutely essential that we worship God every aspect of our lives, even in our homes. At a funeral of an elderly man, a couple of his friends from church were sitting at the kitchen table, and they visited with his 4 grown children. One of them asked, what do you children remember most of your dad? All 4 of them began telling of their memories. But the first thing they all mentioned was they remembered their mom and dad kneeling beside the bed and praying together every single night. Memory number 1. You see, brethren, let me say this to you. When you watch your father submitting his life to God, speaking to God about his family and pleading for God for forgiveness, pleading for God for guidance for his children and himself, he will understand how important it is. There was a group of first graders that were asked to draw a picture of God in their Sunday school. All of the children depicted God some of the children as rainbows. Some of them as an old man coming on the clouds, and one little boy actually spoke about God looking like Superman. But there was one picture of a little girl who said, I don't know what God looks like, so I just drew the picture of my daddy. You see, brethren, let me say this to you. The greatest blessing is for your children to see God in your and my life. to be able to see how mom respects dad and speaks kindly to him and love him. In the fourth place, being a godly father means training your children. Verse 11, for you know, like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God. He calls you into his own kingdom and glory. In other words, what he's saying is that when you were with me, when you lived with me as your father, I encouraged you and I challenged you to walk in the footsteps of Christ. Why? Because I do so. Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And that means that, when you and I start disciplining, sometimes we look at discipline as punishment. It's not true. When a child's going through a difficult phase of rebellion, trying to find themselves through their growing stages of their life, it becomes a teaching moment for that child, where you lovingly say, this is the way we do things, my angel. Everyone can be a brute, but it takes a man to be a father. This morning, I want to encourage each of our fathers to live in only 4 areas this week: to show love and affection to your children. Secondly, to work hard for your children. Don't sit around trying to wait for somebody to do the work that you should be doing. The third way is to show Jesus Christ in the way that you live day by day. And the fourth way, teaching and encouraging your children to grow in their love for God. Many years ago, I watched my wife knows I watch a program called Alaska. It's about, I'm not sure, what is it called, Susan? Where these people live in Alaska on these homesteads. And then I was reminded of a book by Leonard Sweet called Soul Salsa. And it speaks of a tribe in Native America where the way they treat their young children is to take the child on the night of the boy's birthday, 13th birthday, placed in a dense forest to spend the entire night alone. Until then, he'd never been away from his family and the security of his household and the tribe. But on that night, that son was blindfolded, taken miles away. And when he took off the blindfold, he was in the middle of a thick wood by himself all night long. Every time a twig snapped, he visualized a wild animal ready to pounce. Every time an animal howled, he imagined a wolf leaping out of the darkness. Every time the wind blew, he wondered what more sinister sound it masked. No doubt it must have been terrifying for him, looking into darkness and seeing maybe eyes peering back at him through the bushes. And after what seems like an eternity, the first ray of sunlight enters the interior of the forest. Looking around, the boy started seeing flowers and trees and outlines of the path. And then, to his utter astonishment, he beheld the figure of a man standing just a few feet away, armed with a bow and arrow, and it was the boy's father. He'd been there all night long, watching over him. And so, it's a beautiful picture which we as fathers play with our children. We prepare our children to be strong, to be courageous, to stand on their own, but we're still right there, ready to take care of them in any way that we need to. It's a beautiful picture of God. It's a beautiful picture of God that stands and watches over us. And you might be going through the most difficult time of your life, Dad, but I want to say this to you: always, always, in the back of your mind, remind yourself that God is watching over me and I am never alone. Many years ago, they tried that exercise with Ricky. Do you remember that one, Ricky in Omanus? Man, I had such vivid memories. We had Ricky, John Dereck, and a few of his mates, and they were standing about about 20, 30 meters apart. And it was very dark. And suddenly that night there was a sound in the bushes. And you saw Ricky, John Dereck, and all the mates coming in there. Boy, there. How old are you guys, Ricky? I can't remember, but I was young enough to be very scared. All us. Say again, Ricky? And Ricky comes running in there. Boy, he hoofs it. And he comes past me, right past. He almost makes it out the other door, and he makes a quick switch. And he sits behind me. I said, what's the story? He said, it's scary out there, man. You see, sometimes we all go through those moments. Shame, Ricky still goes through them today. But all the way through, as fathers, we are still little boys in our hearts. But that's the beautiful thing, is that never forget that your Father is standing and watching you. And He's saying, no one will touch a hair on the head of this child without my permission. Stay focused, dads, and be great fathers today, and enjoy the day that's set aside for you. And may God continually bless you and strengthen you in your walk. God bless. Happy Father's Day.